Well, hey, welcome. I'm Erik Ohlsen. I'm really excited to take you on a tour of a 1-acre permaculture homestead. And here we are here at the Ohlsen Homestead. 5 years we've been on this journey on this land, and what you're gonna get to see is the abundance that is possible when you work with soil, when you work with water, when you think about carbon and you think about water and you think about plants and how we integrate all the elements with a consciousness around our impact on the land, with a focus on producing food for our community. And when we are able to pull these elements together in an ecosystem, a community that brings all of life together in a harmonious dance, that is what you're going to see here on this homestead. It only took us 5 years to do it. And as we journey through this land, I want you to imagine your local library. I want you to imagine your backyard. I want you to imagine your police station. I want you to imagine your city hall, your public spaces, your public parks, because every one of these landscapes is ripe and ready to be an ecological paradise. One that builds soil, that catches water, that creates habitat and life for all living things, and that connects people, this human element, back to the land in such a way that we can have food and medicine and connection. And that is what this is all about. It's simple and it's complex because we're working within the patterns of nature. So come on, let's go on a journey and let's explore the layers and the connections and the smells and the flavors and the patterns of a 1-acre permaculture homestead. So let's talk about water for a moment, because when we step onto a property, a project, whether it's a small little lot or it's a bigger property, water is one of the first and most important patterns that we first assess, we observe, we listen. What are the patterns of water on the landscape? And then we use water as our main design element, our foundation for how we lay out the system as we go forward. So here's what's happening here on this 1-acre homestead. Okay, so first off, we're on a nice gentle slope in a loamy soil, a sandy loam soil. And what we assessed on this property was that it would benefit from some terracing. So we did some small terraces, not big, huge terraces that require enormous bulldozers, but we did some gentle terracing, 3 main terrace systems on this land, which provide part of our water reticulation process here. The way water moves on the landscape, it spreads out across these terraces very evenly. We have good drainage on the land, and even during our biggest rain events and our biggest, wettest winters, and we've had record-breaking winters here since we've been on the site, 5 years, not a single drop of water has left the land. That's millions of gallons of water that are literally being caught and infiltrated on this 1 acre. And we're doing our part as stewards of the landscape. And you can do this too. You can do your part as stewards of the land, whatever land that may be, to allow water to come on into the soil, to infiltrate. And not only is it creating a water lens under the soil and providing a resource for trees to tap into, but it's also reducing erosion. It's reducing flooding. And it's adding to the cooling of the planet, because as we bring that water into the ground, plants thrive, the land is allowed, it can absorb all of that, and it cools the surface of the soil down, which is actually a vital, important part to cooling our entire planetary ecosystem down. So this is step 1. And then we need to think about, well, what is the sources of our water? How are we going to water our vegetables and our fruit trees in the dry time of the year? So what we've done here is we've created a roof water catchment system, which we can catch approximately 100,000 gallons a year off of half of our roof space, and we're going to walk through a few of the steps of that roof system. We're going to look at the leaf catch and the downspout and the first flush filter. And the way that we've set this system up is that we have a transfer tank. So water comes off the house, It goes into a little 1,000 gallon transfer tank, and then when that fills up, there's a little sensor in there. This one's a bit of an automated system. It kicks on and it pumps that 1,000 gallons into two 5,000 gallon tanks. So we have 10,000 gallons, really 11,000 gallons of water storage in tanks on the site. And the reason why we had to do that little transfer tank is because we want to get this water as high on the property as possible so that we can gravity feed it back out to the landscape. So we placed our big tanks at the high part of the property. But when those tanks overflow, and we're going to check this out, then they flow into a 30,000 gallon earthen pond. And so this is part of how we've looked at water and water resources on this land to really affect not only our own water resilience, but to do our part as responsible members of planet Earth. Within all of that is equally important to think about the soil, the surface of the soil, the organic matter in the soil, the biomass on top of the soil. And our goal here on this homestead is to keep as much of the land covered in plants and or mulch as we can 100% of 100 days, 365 days of the year. 100% of the time, we want to keep the ground covered and literally create a living sponge on top of the surface. So that enables us, as we build the organic matter in the soil here, it enables us to catch and store hundreds of thousands, if not millions of gallons of water just in the soil itself. So when we approach water resilience on a landscape, on a homestead, small or large, when we approach that, this is not a one-size-fits-all approach. This is looking at water from every angle: the catchment angle, the absorption angle, the cooling side of things, the how water flows on the surface, the kind of plant choices that we're making. Water guides us through this whole set of decision-making processes that lead us to the kinds of techniques that we end up implementing. So that's how we look at water on the site, and we're going to go and visit some of these different zones, and you can see literally how these systems work. I wanted to bring you here just to show you, when we're talking about the rain catchment system, the roof system, just like here's a couple simple components about how that works. I mean, we're literally taking water off the roof, we're connecting here to the gutter, we're coming down. This is a leaf catch, so a leaf screen, so bigger particles get caught right there, so you don't have that going into your pipe, and then that goes down. And one of the things that's interesting about this system is that we use what's called a wet line conveyance. And so what that means is that the water literally goes down the pipe, and then the pipe is trenched in the ground. And so the water goes through that pipe under the trench, and then it literally comes up and into the tank. And it kind of seems magical because somehow the water is going back up that pipe at the end to get into the tank. And that's all because water finds its own level. So our first tank that this water's going into, as long as the top of that tank is below this point right here, as long as the top of the tank is below, we can go anywhere on the property and we can run that water underground and bring it up to this elevation right here. So we took a little bit of surveying to figure out what's the right spot, how big of a tank can we use. We'll look at that transfer tank in a minute to get that water. So this is all passive, this is all gravity powered to get that water into that transfer tank. And we have per year tens of thousands of gallons of water that just go right here in this pipe, completely passive, that move into our roof water catchment system. Let's talk about microclimates for a moment. You want to be able to assess on your homestead, on your project, what are the different microclimates? Are there frost pockets? Are there areas where there's a strong wind? Is there very strong sun from a certain angle? And then when you choose your plants, you want to be very clear about placing the right kind of plant in the right microclimate. So I'm standing here next to a lemon, and we have a whole series of citrus trees all around the house and all around a particular part of this landscape. And through our assessment lens, we were able to identify these zones that had absolutely no frost. There's a series of redwoods and oak trees on the west-hand side that actually create a buffer to cool winds. We're on a slope where the cold air sloughs off and goes down to the lower elevations. And so we've utilized these different areas to ensure that we can plant a diversity of different species. And now we're 5 years into it. We're harvesting lemons, we're harvesting mandarins, we're harvesting limes, and it's been a wonderful abundance in an area, a part of the world that isn't known for these sorts of plants, these sorts of subtropical plants. They really live in the edge, and so we've been able to grow these plants here just through observing these different microclimates. So there's a bunch going on right here. First off, right back here is one of the 5,000 gallon tanks. We have two 5,000 gallon tanks that are linked together. So when water goes in that transfer tank, off the roof of the house, into the transfer tank, it comes into these two 5,000 gallon tanks, so 10,000 gallons of storage here. They're linked at the bottom so they fill up evenly with each other. And when they overflow into this 30,000 gallon pond. So we've taken a bank of water and we've placed it at the high point in the property. This is real abundance. This is real security. If the power went out, if we were in a natural disaster, if we had an emergency moment, we would have tens of thousands of gallons of water on hand, either for human consumption or to keep our food production systems going. So this is not only a ongoing abundance to keep the food forest thriving, but it's also an emergency asset for fire, for any kind of natural disaster. So it really gives us a sense of security, because at this point, once the water's up in these tanks, it's all gravity fed out, so no electricity is needed. So that's part of that water resilience plan. Now, right here is one of the many apple varieties that we have on this site. And I want to talk a little bit about how we choose fruit and nut trees and how we choose edible perennials to ensure that we've got food throughout the entire year. So this tree is about 4 years old. It's an heirloom varietal. I don't remember which one it is at this moment. I always keep a map if you can. I have a map somewhere that has all of the varietals because the tag has fallen off. But where I'm standing right here is when what will be a future apple circle. We actually have 5 apple trees planted in a circle around a huge rain garden. So we dug out a rain garden, we put a bunch of biomass material in there. It's a big carbon sponge. We planted 10 apple trees around it, and eventually these are gonna grow up and create a bit of a canopy, and we're actually creating somewhat of an outdoor room. Well, here's what's really interesting, is that each one of these apples is a completely different heirloom open pollinated varietal, and none of these harvest at the same time of the year. So when we chose our varietals, we chose varieties that harvest in August, September, October, November, December, January. We're extending that harvest season for 6 months of the year just through the varietals that we've chosen. And we've done the same with our pears, we've done the same with our plums, with our peaches, with our nectarines, with a lot of our different fruit species. We've chosen these different cultivars to extend that harvest season. Now, we have one family living on this 1 acre homestead, but we also give the abundance to the community, to our neighbors, to our friends, to our families, and to really schools and really anyone who wants it. We pass that abundance on. But it's really nice to know that we don't have to spend all of our time harvesting all in 1 month, and then all of a sudden the harvest is gone. We're spreading that out month after month after month, so there's always something to eat in the garden. Now, think back again to your local library, your local park, your backyard, your neighbor's yard, your city, your city hall. Think back to what it would be like if every one of our public landscapes and all the landscapes around our buildings, our homes, and our businesses had a harvest throughout the year. Now, some climates don't allow for that, colder climates and such, but for a lot of planet Earth, we can be growing food, low impact, low energy, high nutrition, nutrient dense, and we can have something to harvest every single day. And my children have grown up in a homestead like this, and the freedom of being able to walk out. Everyone should have that right to be able to go out and just pick food right from the land. I believe it's a birthright of all humans, all people on this planet. And it is crazy simple to do it. It's actually crazy simple. It takes a little bit of will, a little bit of physical energy, and a lot of heart. And we can grow food everywhere, and we can do it in small spaces, and we can do it all throughout the year. But you just need to think strategically and really plan out these different harvest seasons so that you can get that full year-round harvest. I wanted to bring you all down to the earthen pond. Okay, right now it's getting topped off a bit with the stored winter storm. So we're literally taking the winter storm that we caught and we put in those tanks, and we're topping off our earthen pond. Now, this pond is a young pond. It's still a project in process, so it's going to actually go through a lot of changes. But I wanted to bring you down just to talk for a minute about what water resilience and water security really means. And pond systems allow us to create not only storage systems for water, but also habitat systems. So there's frogs that are living in here and being born out of here. Birds and insects use this as their main watering hole. Mammals use it as their main watering hole. Dragonflies are being born out of this daily at this time of the year. So this is a living oasis for all of the members of our ecological community. And when we are setting out on this mission to create ecosystems that are self-sustained, ecosystems that work for the ecology. How we cool down the earth is every little landscape at a time, and the more ponds and the more water that we have, we are literally cooling down the air on planet Earth, on the surface, right here in this garden. So this pond, we've got evaporative cooling as part of the microclimate moderation. Because this is an earthen pond and some of this is leaking down into the earth, we're literally hydrating the entire landscape on this knoll with this pond. We're also providing that resource for all living things to have. When it's really crazy hot out, you can come, all the life on the land can come and get that fresh drink of water, that sustaining life element. So beyond all of that, we are now actually storing this water for future use as well. So we can use it to water our food forest. We can use it in emergency situations if there's fire. So the security and the abundance just from a pond is, you really can't number all of them. And again, we're just in a 1 acre homestead, and this isn't a very big pond, but it's still 30,000 gallons. That's a significant amount of water when we're in a drought or when we need that resource to tap into. So think about how we use wood and wood material and wood products in our current culture, for paper, for fuel, for building, for biomass production. We cut trees down, we cut forests down, we cut entire ecosystems down to produce these basic products that we use daily in our lives. Well, what if we could grow all of our wood fiber needs right in our landscapes, right in our cities, right in our parks, right in our gardens? What if we could just grow all of that, and not just grow to harvest, but to harvest indefinitely? And that's what we do when we manage a coppice grove. And that's what this is right here. So when we landed on this homestead 5 years ago, we had huge eucalyptus trees, 150 foot tall, large eucalyptus trees, and some of them were hazards, and we ended up taking down a bunch of these eucalyptus. We reused all that material on site for firewood or for building retaining walls, for crafting wood, for biomass, mulch. So we reused all of that. But when it came down to the stumps, one of the things that a eucalyptus does, same as an oak, same as a madrone, same as many fruit trees, hazelnuts, many trees around the world, will sprout from those stumps. So you cut it down and it sprouts from the stump. That's a coppice, right? So one of the things that we did is we left 3 eucalyptus stumps, rather than grinding them out like we did all the others. We left them because we wanted to be able to grow and harvest our own wood fiber. And so that's what this is. This is a eucalyptus coppice. You can see that there's 3 nice poles right here. And so what we've done is, when that new growth sprouted out of the stump, we managed it back to 3 or 4 new little sprouts, new little shoots. And we're allowing them to grow up into nice straight poles. And I'm not sure how we're going to use it. We might build a trellis out of this. We might use it for firewood. We might build some kind of fancy arch that we might put at one of the gates. When we're ready to harvest, we'll use this for something. We might build a greenhouse out of it. But the beautiful thing, because these are about two-year-old canes right now, and we're going to wait another couple years until we have about a 4-inch diameter poles to harvest. So the beautiful thing is that when we harvest those poles, and we have 2 other eucalyptus coppice doing the same thing, the tree's not dead. We harvested that material that we could use now, and then it's going to sprout from the stump again, and we're going to repeat that process. It's a cycle. Now imagine that in your cities, in your parks, in your farms, we could grow hedgerows of coppice groves, of coppice systems that provided needed wood fiber materials for your community. We can localize this. We don't have to cut down the national forests in order to provide for our wood fiber needs. We can do this in our gardens. We can do this in our homesteads. We can do this in our communities. It just takes a bit of management and using the right sort of species. And so that's what we've done here. We've got this beautiful coppice grove. In a couple of years, we'll harvest it. Our other coppices are on a different cycle, so we're not going to harvest them all at the same time. So that's the other beautiful thing, is when we create these wood lots, we can always have the forest and be harvesting it at the same time. You can literally plan these out so you could harvest every single year and you're never ever cutting the forest down. And it's still providing shade, it's still habitat, it's still providing mulch. One of the things that we do is we lop off the lower branches so that we maintain these nice straight shoots. And when we lop those off, look at this biomass that we have. We've got material for mulch. We can use this to make essential oils. This eucalyptus essential oil is very medicinal, so we've got a lot of material to make essential oil. We've got material for mulch. We could also just let these dry and use it for kindling. There's a lot of different sources, and I'm showing you eucalyptus because that's what I have. But we do it with oak, we do it with walnut, we do it with hazelnut, we do it with madrone. There's so many. We do it with apple. There's so many trees that have this ability. And if we utilize them for all their parts, and we work in the dimension of time, we work with succession, we can have abundance in this material forever. I wanted to take you over to this fig tree. This is one of the superstars of the garden right now. This is a Desert King fig. So again, when we're thinking about choosing the right variety, it's really effective to choose the right variety for your climate. This is also called the Coastal King because this is a fig tree that does really well near the coast, where we might maybe get cold nights and get foggy summers. This fig does really well. And so it gets yellow when it's ripe, and it has a beautiful color inside. And it's crazy good. One of the magical things about these figs is these are all from cuttings. All the figs here are from cuttings. So we just took a branch, literally took a branch about that long, cut it, stuck it into a pot of soil, no root hormone, nothing like that, stuck it in a pot of soil, kept it wet, grew roots within a couple months, and we planted them out, and now we've got figs. Now we're eating our figs, right? These trees, since then, okay, these are cuttings that I took 5 years ago. I've taken 100 cuttings off of this tree since then and planted fig forests all around my region. So this is actually turned into a mother fig, a mother plant, spreading its genetics all up and down the North Coast, California. So when we're choosing our plants, when we're in relationship with them, there's so much more than just the harvest. There's so much more abundance. There's the seed. There's propagating them as mother gardens. There's harvesting them like those coppice groves. And so part of this relationship to discover the abundance in the garden, in the homestead, on the land, in the town, is to spend your days talking to plants, to spend your days observing and listening. I'll walk out into the park near where I live, where it's all natives, and I know when the elderberry is ripe. I know when the wild rose hips are ready to harvest. I know when the first blackberry can be eaten. I know when the acorns are dropping off of the black oaks, because I've taken that time to listen and to observe those patterns. And it's every single one of us can do that. Every single one of us can be in a daily relationship with the plant kingdom around us, and discover all of the abundance that's there all of the time. And so this fig tree to me represents abundance. Now, this isn't the only fig variety that we have. We actually have 4 different fig varieties in the landscape here. But what will happen eventually in many years to come is these trees will grow large and they'll get old. Fig trees can grow so old. And you can see that this tree is almost like a candelabra. The branches are wanting to lay down on the ground. So one of the magical growing patterns of figs is that after a time, they'll lay their branches on the ground and root, and that new rooted section will turn into a new fig tree. And then decades later, that tree will lay down and create another one. And so there are fig trees that are hundreds of years old and literally cover acres of land. One fig that covers acres of land. That's what's possible. That's the abundance that's possible when we start working with species like these figs. So I'm really excited in this homestead to cultivate these interesting growth patterns with these figs. And eventually my grandkids, it's a legacy for whoever's on this land when I'm long gone. These figs are still going to be here, providing their abundance and their inspiration. When we're looking at creating a food forest and we want to create an ecosystem that can sustain itself in as many ways as possible, one of the things we have to focus on is how does our garden, our food forest, our landscape get its nutritional needs, its nitrogen, its minerals. How do we create systems that are self-resilient? And one of the ways we do that is we plant specific kinds of plants that actually support and build fertility in the landscape itself. This is one right here. This is called a Russian olive, which in some ecosystems is invasive, not invasive in this one. So it's the kind of thing you need to check, always check to see if a plant is invasive in your ecosystem. And this is a nitrogen fixer that is also creates an edible berry, is a great habitat plant, is highly medicinal, creates an antioxidant, cancer-fighting fruit. It attracts bees in the springtime, in the early springtime, and you could cut this to the ground and it'll sprout back up from the stump. Now, one of the ways that we manage these, I call these fertility pumps. So all throughout the landscape, all throughout the food forest, we have these different fertility pumps. It may be a tree like this, or it might be a shrub like a lupin, but they're always nitrogen fixers, and they're plants that we can cut back hard and that will stimulate new growth. And every time we do that, when I come in here and I cut back all of this material, I literally just harvested my own mulch. And here's one of the warnings I want to give you is that, you know, a lot of us jumpstart our gardens and our landscapes by bringing material in from offsite. We bring in compost from offsite and wood chips from offsite, and that's a great way to jumpstart your system. It's a great way to bring in carbon. But for long-term resilience and ecological sustainability, how do we generate that sort of fertility right on site? And there's a whole world that we could talk about now about soil microbiology, about plant exudates, all that soil science is taking place here in the landscape. But one of the things that we need is we need organic matter, we need this biomass, and we want this nitrogen fixing material. So here it took me 2 seconds to harvest this. Now I just chop this up. This is it. This is the work, folks. It's the chop and drop method. And you know, over all of the decades since people have been doing this, there's been a lot of speculation, just chop and drop work and all these things. But in the end, we're growing our own biomass. We're growing our own mulch. Think about how little amount of a carbon footprint it takes. I didn't have to haul this in. I didn't have to drive it in. There's no gasoline required. It's taking this energy that you see right here, and I'm literally growing my own mulch to build biomass. Now, when this breaks down, it's going to release nutrients into the soil. That it will be available to other plants, and all that microbiology, the bacteria and the fungi, protozoas, the worms, all of them are going to help break it down and turn it into rich, nutrient-rich soil. Now, one of the things about this that often comes up is, well, if you just leave it on the surface, a lot of that material is going to gas off. A lot of that nitrogen will gas off to the atmosphere. You're not going to get it into the soil. And that's true to a degree. And that's why often what we do is we'll we'll chop and drop a bunch of nitrogen-rich material, and then maybe we'll grab some other kind of biomass like comfrey, which is a mineral-rich material, and we'll actually layer that on top of the chopped green manure plant. And I can keep harvesting in the garden. I can keep harvesting all kinds of biomass from these plants. Deciduous leaves from the maple tree is a great mulch, and we can keep layering this material on without having to bring that material from off-site. Now, one of the things that's going to happen with this one, because it's grown kind of big, is we're going to cut it back really hard next year. There's 2 cherry trees growing on the other side. What's going to happen is when we cut that back, there's going to be a bit of a root die-off. And that root die-off is going to slough organic matter off into the soil, which will be fed on by all those microorganisms. And this is a pump of fertility, a regenerating pump of fertility, because it can grow up again, and we'll do it again and again and again and again. So we're pumping the ground with organic matter. We're harvesting mulch for the surface. And meanwhile, we're using a plant that has a whole array of different functions. Useful plants are key to having a multitude of different harvests. So if you can choose a plant that builds soil and provides food and provides medicine, that's going to be a better choice than a plant that just does one of those functions. So that's part of our strategy in reducing the amount of labor, reducing the amount of inputs to build and grow this food for us, and also increase that fecund fertility and food to keep this system thriving for the long term. One of the layers to how we have managed this homestead is that we've barely managed it. We live big, busy lives. And how do you keep an acre homestead when you have so many projects and businesses and you're raising children? It can be a difficult task. So one of the approaches is to relinquish power to the ecosystem. And one of the ways you can set that up in a way where you still are growing abundance, you're building soil and habitat and food and all the things that you wish will be in your homestead, is you let plants reseed. And that's one of the aspects of our homestead that's really important to us, is letting everything seed, everything grow and produce their seed, die back. And then what we do is we take those seed heads almost like living paintbrushes covered in seed, and we just brush the ground with them, and we take handfuls and we throw them out, and we're not worried about if it's in the pathway or in the bed or any of that at all, because our cultural aesthetic for this land is ecosystem, not prim, perfect, pruned, organized, but it's a wild ecosystem of abundance. And so here are a few of the plants that every year they move themselves around and provide all their beautiful, wonderful benefits without us doing anything at all. One of them is this daikon radish. And one of the beautiful things about the daikon radish is it creates a huge taproot underground. So if we want to build soil, it's great to have huge taproot plants that we let just rot in the ground and feed all those microorganisms and all the life in the soil. So we have daikon radish as well as wild radish growing wild all over the homestead. And if it gets in the way of something, we chop it at the base. We use the top as biomass material mulch that we can put in the surface, we can put it in the compost, whatever. And so it provides all of those nutrient needs, but we didn't plant it. It does its own thing. Now, the other thing that I noticed this year was as we enter deep into the insect apocalypse that's happening on planet Earth right now, every one of our landscapes need to be havens, way stations for the insect world. And this spring, I noticed that a lot of the plants people consider weeds, like wild radish and wild mustards and things like this, were forage plants for honeybees and native bees. And so rather than go and cut back to try to clean the garden up too early, we just let all that radish just stay. And it provided an amazing forage for insects for months. It just kept going and going and going and going. And then when we were ready to open up a new space to plant some vegetables, we would just cut it at the base, harvest that biomass for mulch, and then plant in that area. So the wild radish is amazing at that. Borage as well, which borage is our biggest weed in the garden is borage. It takes over more than anything. And they say a garden without borage is like a heart without courage, has an edible flower. The bees go crazy for it. They love it. And it has a huge taproot. It's one of the most amazing biomass growing plants in the entire homestead. So every day I could harvest pounds and pounds of borage biomass to add to the compost to build soil, and or I leave it and it maintains itself as an incredible habitat plant. Another one is this wild mullein over here. This one's starting to go to seed now. You can see that it has all these little pods that are all turning to seed. Over here, we've got the little flowers and a huge diversity of insects, bees and parasitoid wasps and tachinid flies and hoverflies are all over these all day long. They're all over these flowers. And these flowers are also medicinal. So we're getting a medicinal plant that's feeding the insect world, that's beautiful, that we can cut back for biomass when we want. It reseeds itself and provides that beautiful niche. We didn't plant these, they planted themselves. And behind, you'll see Cosmo. Now, Cosmo is another one of these plants that reseeds itself. It's an amazing plant for butterflies and bees. And like even right here, I just saw a little green bee, right? There's a huge diversity on these. When we leave these to go to seed, they produce all of these black seeds. And this is a little bit early. There we go. So we'll let these dry on the plant, and it'll produce all these black seeds. And so this is that paintbrush I was talking about. Once these are all seed heads, we'll just take these and we'll literally just paintbrush the ground with them wherever we want cosmos to grow. That's it. You paintbrush the ground, you drop the plant, you walk on, okay? I might have done that after I ate a fig. Who knows? I just came out for a harvest and now I'm spreading seeds around. I roll on them, I bump into them. Oh, and what's this? Right here. This is one of our other superstar reseeding plants, which is calendula, an incredible medicinal, also a great habitat plant, smells wonderful, edible flowers. And this plant we did not plant, except for the seeds seeding themselves like that. And there they're planted. And this is how we maintain an acre homestead. Sometimes people say, oh, Eric, you're so busy, you've got businesses and books and projects and you're raising a family, and how do you have your homestead? Well, this is it. We relinquish power, okay? Let it go, set it up, let it go, step back, let nature take its course. Let the ecosystem create the pattern. And just be one of the birds, be one of the mammals, be just a participant in the ecology. And when we can see ourselves as participants and not the control over, not the decision makers, but the willing partners with planet Earth, we can save this planet and we can save each other. And we can do it with food and flowers and fun. and we can do it together. I'll see you in the garden. do is, you plant that food. And if you want to get just the most energy from the food and just have a really good time at the same time, you don't even pick it with your fingers, right? You just go right in with your mouth. I mean, we could be our own browsers, and you just go right in there. Dang, that's so good. That's so good. Everybody needs to experience that. Find your favorite fruit wherever it is, apple, pear, plum, peach, berry. Don't pick it with your fingers, just eat it right off the vine. Still growing when it's in your mouth. That's a worthy experience.